Imagine writing a biography of someone, a real person, a historical figure, and having your book banned before a single copy ever reaches a bookstore shelf. Not banned after publication. Not pulled from shelves after controversy. Banned before it even existed in print, in the country it was about. That is exactly what happened in 2006 when journalist Paul Handley published The King Never Smiles, a biography of Thailand's Bhumibol Adulyadej through Yale University Press. The Thai government blocked access to the Yale University Press website inside Thailand. They pressured the publisher, one of the most respected academic presses in the world, not to release the book at all. They failed. The book came out anyway. And then, 5 years later, an American citizen was arrested and thrown into a Thai prison not for writing the book, not for publishing it, but for translating excerpts of it and posting them online, while living in Colorado. This is a story about a book. But it is also a story about a king, a country, a myth, and what happens when a society decides that certain truths are simply too dangerous to speak. So let us go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the book. The beginning of the man. On December 5, 1927, a boy was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts. His name was Bhumibol Adulyadej. His father was a Thai prince studying medicine at Harvard. His mother was a commoner who had married into royalty. Nobody thought this boy would ever be king. He was third in line. He had an older brother, Ananda, and an older sister. The idea that this American-born child, who would grow up speaking French and English, who learned jazz saxophone as a teenager in Switzerland, who loved cars and photography and science, would one day rule the ancient kingdom of Thailand as a living god, that would have seemed impossible. But history does not care for the possible. In 1932, while Bhumibol was only 5 years old, Thailand, then called Siam, underwent a revolution. A group of Western-educated military officers and bureaucrats overthrew the absolute monarchy of King Prachadapak, Rama VII, and replaced it with a constitutional monarchy. The king lost his absolute power. And then, 3 years later, in 1934, King Prachadapak abdicated entirely. He had no children. That meant the crown passed to Bhumibol's older brother, Ananda Mahadol, who was 9 years old at the time. A 9-year-old king. The family was still in Switzerland. Regents were appointed. The boys stayed in Europe. The young Bhumibol grew up in Lausanne. He went to the École Nouvelle de la Suisse romande. He got a baccalaureate with majors in French literature, Latin, and Greek. In 1942, he became a jazz enthusiast and took up the saxophone. A passion he would keep for the rest of his life. He enrolled at the University of Lausanne to study science. Then, on June 9, 1946, everything changed forever. Bhumibol's brother, King Ananda Mahadol, was found dead in his bedroom in the Grand Palace in Bangkok. He was 20 years old. He had been shot in the head, at close range, with a pistol. To this day, nobody knows who pulled the trigger. Within hours of the discovery, a court physician declared it an accident. The official story: the king had been cleaning his pistol when it discharged and struck him in the head. But forensic evidence did not support this. The angle of the wound, the powder burns, the position of the body, none of it lined up with an accidental discharge. Suicide was considered. But those who knew King Ananda said he had been in good spirits, that he had plans, that he was due to return to Switzerland in 4 days to complete his doctorate in law. That left one other possibility, a possibility that was, and remains, almost unthinkable in Thailand. Murder. Regicide. An assassination inside the royal palace. 3 palace servants were eventually charged, convicted, and executed. But many historians and investigators believe the real truth of what happened that morning was never uncovered. The case was closed, not solved. The morning of the killing, 18-year-old Bhumibol later said that he entered his brother's bedroom at 9 a.m., found him sleeping, and left. 20 minutes later, a gunshot echoed across the palace. He was the last person to see King Ananda alive. He has never said more than that. And with his brother dead at 20, Bhumibol Adulyadej became King Rama IX of Thailand at the age of 18. He returned to Switzerland, switched his studies from science to law and political science, and prepared for a life he had never been raised to live. He would reign for 70 years. He would become the longest-serving monarch in modern history. He would never fully explain what happened to his brother. When Bhumibol returned to Thailand permanently in 1951, he was 23 years old. He spoke imperfect Thai. He had spent the overwhelming majority of his life in Europe. He loved jazz, he raced cars, he had lost his right eye in a serious car accident in Switzerland in 1948, and wore a prosthetic for the rest of his life, and he was deeply westernized in his tastes and habits. He was also walking into a kingdom that had been politically chaotic since the 1932 revolution. Military coups, prime ministers cycling in and out of power, political instability as a baseline condition, this was the Thailand Bhumibol inherited. So how did this Western-raised young man with imperfect Thai become the most revered figure in his country's history? How did he go from being a jazz-playing university student in Lausanne to being worshipped as a semi-divine presence, a living Buddha, a figure whose image hung in every home, school, office, and movie theater in the country? The answer, according to Paul Handley's book, is a combination of genuine dedication, brilliant image management, and a systematic, decades-long construction of a royal myth. In the early years, Bhumibol worked hard to build a relationship with his people. He traveled to rural areas. He launched development projects for poor farmers. He was photographed out among the people, something Thai kings had historically rarely done. He played saxophone. He sailed boats competitively. He painted. He composed music. He was presented not just as a king but as a man of culture, a genius, a person who possessed almost supernatural talents. The royal public relations machinery was extraordinarily effective. State television broadcast the king's activities constantly. Every evening, before any film screened in a Thai cinema, audiences stood to watch a royal tribute video while the national anthem played. His image, always in formal attire, always composed, always with that serious, unsmiling expression, was everywhere. The title of Handley's book comes from this. The king never smiles. The stern, composed, almost severe expression that characterized nearly every official image of Bhumibol was not accidental. It was deliberate. In Thai royal tradition, a monarch does not smile in public. Smiling is informal. Smiling implies approachability, even vulnerability. The king's unsmiling face communicated gravity, authority, and divinity. The myth worked. For decades, ordinary Thais held a genuine, profound, deep love for King Bhumibol. He was not simply respected as a head of state. He was beloved. He was revered. He was, in the hearts of millions of his people, something closer to a god than a politician. And Handley does not dismiss this. He acknowledges the king's rural development projects as genuinely beneficial. He credits Bhumibol's work on irrigation, crop substitution, convincing highland farmers to grow alternative crops instead of opium, and disaster relief as real accomplishments that improved real lives. But he also asks a question that nobody in Thailand was allowed to ask: what was behind the myth? What was the king doing when the cameras were not rolling? What role was he actually playing in the political life of his country? And the answers Handley found were, to put it mildly, complicated. Thailand has a remarkable record in one specific category: it has had more military coups than almost any other country in the world. Between 1932 and 2014, there were at least 12 successful coups and several failed attempts. The Thai military has seized power with a kind of regularity that would be shocking anywhere else. And at the center of many of these coups, Handley argues, was the palace. This is the central, explosive claim of The King Never Smiles, and it is the reason the book was banned, the official story of Thailand, the one taught in schools, broadcast on television, printed in newspapers. Presents King Bhumibol as a figure above politics. A constitutional monarch, like the Queen of England. Present but not interfering. A symbolic head of state who represented national unity but did not exercise real political power. Handley's book argues this is simply false. Let us walk through some key moments. 1973, the student uprising against the military dictatorship of Field Marshal the Nam Kitakakorn erupts in Bangkok. Hundreds of thousands of protesters take to the streets. The military opens fire. Dozens are killed. The king intervenes, he opens the palace gates to allow fleeing students to take refuge, and the Nam is forced into exile. This moment became the foundation of Bhumibol's democratic image. He had, people said, saved the democracy movement. But Handley digs deeper. He argues that by this point, the king had already decided that Thanam's regime was too unstable to be useful. His intervention was not a spontaneous act of democratic sympathy, it was a calculated decision to manage the political transition and ensure that the new order would still serve the monarchy's interests. 1976. 3 years later, Thailand's democracy collapses in blood. Right-wing royalist paramilitaries, groups that had the implicit backing of the palace, attack student protesters at Thammasat University in Bangkok. Dozens are killed in what becomes known as the Thammasat massacre. A coup follows. A new military government takes power. Bhumibol endorses the coup. The students who had been protesting in 1973, the ones the king had supposedly protected, were now being killed and brutalized by forces that had the palace's stamp of approval. Handley presents this as evidence that Bhumibol's 1973 intervention was never really about democracy. It was about removing an inconvenient general and restabilizing the system. When the system was restabilized under a new, more reliably conservative military government, the king approved. 1992, this is the episode that became the most famous symbol of Bhumibol's moral authority. Another military general, Suchinda Kraprayan, has seized power. Mass protests erupt. The military fires on protesters. Black May, the Thais call it, sees dozens killed. And then comes the famous footage. The king summons both Suchinda and the pro-democracy leader Chamlong Srimuang to the palace. Cameras are allowed in. The footage shows two powerful men crawling on their hands and knees before the king, prostrating themselves completely. The king admonishes them. Suchinda resigns shortly thereafter. Democracy is restored. The image of that moment, the king on his chair, the two rivals prostrating before him, went around the world. It was held up as the perfect example of Bhumibol's role as a stabilizing moral force, a wise father figure who could end conflicts that no politician could resolve. Handley's analysis is more skeptical. He argues that by the time the king intervened, mass resistance had already made Suchinda's position untenable. His intervention did not end the crisis, it managed the ending of a crisis that was already ending. The king stepped in at the last moment to shape the transition to his advantage and to cement his image as a peacemaker. Whether Handley is entirely right or not is debatable. But the pattern he identifies across these events, palace as the hidden hand guiding political transitions, always in the direction that benefits the monarchy's power and the conservative elite, is a serious scholarly argument based on real evidence. And then came Thaksin. 2001, Thaksin Shinawatra wins the Thai general election. He is a billionaire telecommunications tycoon who builds his political base among Thailand's rural poor, the farmers of the north and northeast who had long felt left behind by Bangkok's elite. He does not need the palace's blessing to govern, he has the votes. And that independence, that potential shift in power away from the traditional elite toward an elected populist, is seen as an existential threat. The tension between Thaksin and the palace builds through the early 2000s. The king publicly criticizes Thaksin's policies. Yellow Shirt Royalists, the People's Alliance for Democracy, called the Yellow Shirts, take to the streets of Bangkok to demand Thaksin's removal. On September 19, 2006, while Thaksin is in New York at the United Nations General Assembly, the Thai military stages a coup. They take over Bangkok. They revoke the constitution. They broadcast news of the coup on television. The king endorses the coup. The coup leaders receive royal approval. A military-appointed government takes over. Thaksin goes into exile. The 2006 coup is the event that, more than any other, shapes the argument of Handley's book. Because it happens in the same year the book is published. And it is, in Handley's framing, the logical endpoint of the pattern he documents, the palace, working in alliance with the military and the conservative elite, moving to remove a democratically elected leader who had become too powerful and too independent. For millions of Thais, this moment shatters the image of Bhumibol as a guardian of democracy. It reveals the palace as a deeply political actor. One that uses the language of morality, unity, and the national interest to justify the removal of leaders it finds inconvenient. And that argument is precisely what makes The King Never Smiles dangerous in Thailand. Not because it is sensationalist. Not because it is a tabloid hit job. But because it is a serious, documented, scholarly case that the King of Thailand was not what his people had been told he was. To understand why this book was banned, you need to understand Section 112 of the Thai Criminal Code. The law states, very simply, whoever defames, insults, or threatens the king, the queen, the heir apparent, or the regent shall be punished with imprisonment of 3 to 15 years. Per offense. Thailand's Lèse-Majesté law, the term comes from French, meaning, injury to majesty, is widely considered the strictest in the world. In countries like Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway, and Denmark, similar laws exist but carry minor penalties or are rarely enforced. In England, the royal family is treated as ordinary citizens in matters of law. In Thailand, you can go to prison for 15 years for a single Facebook post. Anyone, not just the government, not just the police, can file a lèse-majesté complaint against anyone else. And once a complaint is filed, the police are legally obligated to investigate. The conviction rate in lèse-majesté cases hovers around 80%. Prosecutors indict in roughly 99% of cases they receive. These numbers are not a coincidence. They reflect a system where even the accusation of lèse-majesté carries enormous social and legal weight, where judges may fear that acquitting a defendant will itself be seen as disrespectful to the monarchy, and where defendants frequently plead guilty, even when they believe they are innocent. Because a guilty plea with cooperation might mean a shorter sentence than the decade-plus imprisonment that a contested trial could bring. The law has been used to imprison an extraordinary range of people. A Swiss tourist who, while drunk, defaced images of the king, sentenced to 10 years. He received a royal pardon after 1 month and was deported. Australian author Harry Nicolaides, who published a self-published novel with references to the Thai monarchy. Arrested at Bangkok airport, sentenced to 3 years, pardoned after 6 months and deported. A Thai grandfather nicknamed Uncle SMS, sentenced to 20 years in prison for sending 4 text messages. He died in prison in 2012 at age 62 while still appealing his case. And then there is the case most directly connected to The King Never Smiles. Joe Gordon was a Thai-born American citizen. He had lived in the United States for 30 years, working as a car salesman in Colorado. Years before, while living in the U.S., he had translated excerpts of Paul Handley's book into Thai and posted them on his personal blog. He thought he was making important historical information available to Thai speakers. In May 2011, Joe Gordon traveled to Thailand, his birth country, to seek treatment for arthritis and high blood pressure. He was arrested. He was held without bail. After months in detention, he pleaded guilty, hoping for leniency. He was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. Think about what this means. An American citizen. Living in America. Posting content on the internet. Content about a biography published by Yale University Press, one of the most reputable academic publishers in the world, available in any bookstore in the United States. And for this, He was arrested the moment he set foot in Thailand and imprisoned for years. The U.S. Embassy's Consul General in Bangkok described the punishment as severe because he has been sentenced for his right to freedom of expression. The case of Joe Gordon sent a message to the world: the reach of Thailand's Lèse-Majesté laws does not stop at Thailand's borders. If you criticize the Thai monarchy online, from anywhere in the world, and you ever set foot in Thailand, you may be arrested. This is not a historical artifact. The enforcement of Section 112 intensified massively after 2020, when Thailand saw youth-led pro-democracy protests in which, for the first time in modern Thai history, protesters openly questioned the monarchy itself. Since November 2020, at least 284 people have been charged under the Lèse-Majesté law. In one case, a Bangkok court sentenced a civil servant to 43 years in prison for reposting videos on Facebook and YouTube. A single person. 43 years. For social media posts. Paul Handley was born in 1955. He studied international studies at American University in Washington, D.C. After graduating, he went to Asia to learn Chinese, spending time in Taiwan before landing a job with a Hong Kong-based oil industry magazine that sent him to Indonesia. Eventually he made his way to Thailand, where he would spend 13 years as a foreign correspondent, working for publications including the Far Eastern Economic Review and the Asian Wall Street Journal. He covered the country's politics, its economy, its coups and crises. When he began working on The King Never Smiles, he was a journalist doing what journalists do, digging through archives, interviewing sources, going to old bookstalls in Bangkok's Chatuchak market, tracking down official publications and commemorative books and anything that mentioned the royals. He spent years on the research. He was not a royal family obsessive or a provocateur. He was a reporter who had lived in Thailand for over a decade and wanted to write a serious, documented account of the country's most important institution. The Thai government did not see it that way. Before the book was even published, the Thai authorities blocked access inside Thailand to the Yale University Press website. The government pressured Yale directly, urging them, through diplomatic channels and other means, not to publish the book. Yale refused. They reviewed the manuscript carefully. They described it as dispassionate in tone and temperament, and said it had been thoroughly vetted both by leading scholars in the field and by the Yale University Press Faculty Committee. Yale published the book. And the response in the international scholarly community was largely positive. The New York Review of Books called it one of the most important books on Thailand to appear in English. Pacific Affairs called it the first serious biography of perhaps the most important figure in modern Thai history. Foreign Affairs reviewed it seriously. Academics and historians engaged with its arguments. Inside Thailand, it was a different story. The book was banned. Thousands of copies still circulated, smuggled in, passed from hand to hand. The general reaction among Thais who encountered it, Handley later noted, was to criticize the author's style or tone while not actually challenging the substance of what he wrote. That silence, that inability to publicly engage with the book's arguments because doing so might itself be illegal, is perhaps the most chilling part of the story. A book makes serious scholarly claims about a country's political history. And that country's citizens cannot publicly discuss whether the claims are true or false, because even mentioning the book could expose them to prosecution. King Bhumibol Adulyadej died on October 13, 2016, at the age of 88. He had been ill for years, spending much of his final decade in a hospital in Bangkok. The country went into a year of formal mourning. Millions of Thais wore black. The grief was genuine and profound. He had reigned for 70 years. The longest of any monarch in modern history. Under his reign, Thailand had transformed from a poor agricultural country into a regional economic power. Between 1985 and 1994, it was the fastest-growing economy in the world, according to the World Bank. He had launched hundreds of rural development projects. He had genuinely connected with his people in ways that few monarchs in history have managed. And he had also, according to the evidence Paul Handley carefully assembled, used the power of the monarchy to shape Thailand's political landscape in ways that consistently favored the conservative elite over democratic development. He had endorsed coups. He had backed royalist paramilitaries. He had used his moral authority not as a neutral force for stability but as a partisan instrument in Thailand's political struggles. Both things can be true. That is one of the most uncomfortable conclusions of The King Never Smiles, that a person can be genuinely devoted to the welfare of their people and simultaneously be an obstacle to their political freedom. After Bhumibol's death, his son Vajiralongkorn became King Rama X. The new king is a deeply different figure. Where Bhumibol cultivated an image of devotion and self-sacrifice, Vajiralongkorn is more openly powerful and considerably less popular. He has consolidated further control over royal assets and institutions. The Lèse-Majesté crackdowns that accelerated after the 2020 youth protests happened on his watch. The students who led those protests, many of them young enough to have known no king but Bhumibol, dared to say in public what had never been publicly said before, that the monarchy itself needed reform. That a law protecting the king from criticism was incompatible with democracy. That Thailand could not be a free country as long as certain truths could not be spoken. Many of them were arrested. And yet the very existence of that movement. The fact that young Thais in 2020 were willing to stand in public squares and say things that would have been literally unthinkable in 2006, suggests that something has shifted. The myth, so carefully built over 7 decades, has developed cracks. Not because of anything Paul Handley wrote. But because history itself keeps generating new evidence. The King Never Smiles is ultimately a book about the danger of myth. Not myth in the sense of fiction, exactly. But myth in the sense of a story so powerful, so emotionally necessary to a people, that questioning it becomes impossible, not just legally impossible, but psychologically and culturally impossible. The image of King Bhumibol as a saintly, apolitical father figure was not simply imposed from above by the state. It was genuinely believed by millions of ordinary Thais who felt real gratitude and real love. And that is precisely what makes the book dangerous. Not because it is slanderous or malicious, but because it offers a different, more complex, more politically honest account of a figure around whom a nation had built an entire emotional and spiritual architecture. Paul Handley's book could not be discussed in Thailand not simply because the law forbade it, but because the law was backed by something even more powerful, the genuine feelings of a people who did not want their father figure examined too closely. That pattern. The untouchable leader, the law that protects the myth, the silence that spreads outward from the center, is not unique to Thailand. It recurs throughout history, in countries of every ideology, every religion, every political system. The specific details change. The structure remains the same. A book gets written. A government tries to stop it. And then a man in Colorado translates some passages for his blog, travels to Bangkok to treat his arthritis, and ends up in handcuffs. Because the truth, or even just a serious argument about what the truth might be, turned out to be too powerful to simply ignore. The King Never Smiles remains banned in Thailand today. You can buy it on Amazon. You can check it out from a library in the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia. Yale University Press still sells it. Scholars still cite it. And in Thailand, the country it is about, the country whose modern history it documents, the country whose citizens arguably need it most, it is contraband. That is the story of this book. That is the story of what happens when a nation decides that some truths are more dangerous than silence.